Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. I am Tariq Shahzad. Today we are going to discuss about countercurrent mechanism. That what is countercurrent mechanism and how it perform its function. Countercurrent mechanism basically a system of kidney that cause the production of concentrated urine, number one, and number two, it keep the interstitial fluid to concentrated level. These two are basic function that is performed by countercurrent mechanism. And now there are its two types. Number one, counter current multiplier, and number two, counter current ion exchanger. So there are two different parts for the working function of the counter current mechanism. So first of all, counter current mechanism keep interstitial fluid concentrated, number one, and number two, produce concentrated urine. These two basic functions are performed by counter current mechanism. And interstitial fluid mean kidney fluid. The fluid that is present between the kidney tissues is known as interstitial fluid. There are two its steps. Number one, counter current multiplier, and number two, counter current exchanger. Counter current multiplier, that is active process, whereas exchanger is passive process. Counter current multiplier performed by renal tubule, whereas counter current exchanger performed by vasa recta. Keep in mind that these two are different things. Multiplier deal with the renal tubule, whereas counter current exchanger deals with vasa recta. Number one, counter current multiplier. The function of counter current multiplier is to produce the interstitial fluid more concentrated. It means that this process has to add the salts into interstitial fluid. So as we know that nephron has two limbs, ascending and descending. That one is descending limb of renal tubule, and that one is ascending limb of renal tubule. In ascending limb of renal tubule, it is permeable for salts, whereas descending limb is permeable for water. Descending limb is permeable for water, whereas ascending limb is permeable for salt. So counter current multiplier involve the movement of salt from ascending limb to interstitial fluid. From ascending, thick and thin lobe of ascending limb, sodium, potassium and chloride ion moves from these tubules to outward, and that's why the outer part or the interstitial fluid of kidney become more concentrated. When the environment is more concentrated than the material moving into descending limb, the water is in large amount, that's why it moves out of the renal tubule and enter into the more concentrated part of the kidney. Once again, when material move into renal tubule, the outer environment is more concentrated due to counter current multiplier, and counter current multiplier remove the salt from the ascending limb and add it into outer environment or interstitial medium. So this medium will become more concentrated. That's why the material that is filtered in glomerular part, when move into renal tubule, then the water moves outside of the renal tubule, and passively, this movement is passively, and thus outer environment and the renal tubule environment will be equilibrated due to the movement of water out of the renal tubule. Keep in mind that these salts are reabsorbed into outer environment by the active transport, whereas water moves outside the environment by passive transport. So that was all about the counter current multiplier. Next one is counter current exchanger. That what counter current exchanger perform? Counter current exchanger basically, now water is being removed from the renal tubule and added into the interstitial fluid. From interstitial fluid, this fluid has to become the part of our body. So from interstitial fluid or the fluid of the kidney, this extra water now are absorbed by the capillaries that are present over the nephron and will become the part of our circulatory system, and hence the water conserved in our body. So these are the tubules, so these are the capillaries that surrounds the renal tubule, and these capillaries absorb water from the interstitial fluid. Now this one is called as counter current exchanger. Mean counter current exchanger absorb water from interstitial fluid and add it into the circulatory system. So water from interstitial fluid absorb into blood vessels and goes to circulatory system. That was all about the countercurrent mechanism that consists of two part: countercurrent multiplier and countercurrent exchanger. In countercurrent multiplier is an active process and taken place in renal tubules or due to renal tubule, whereas the next one, that is countercurrent exchanger, it is a passive process and it involves the movement of water molecule from the interstitial fluid to the our circulatory system. That was all about the countercurrent mechanism. I think you will got some knowledge from this. Keep watching my channel and also subscribe this one, like this video, and also comment on this. Allah Hafiz.